Arthur stepped into the Blackwood house, his boots crunching on shattered glass. The air tasted of ozone and ancient dust, thick enough to coat his throat. Milo pressed against his ankle, fur standing on end, his tail twitching in sharp, nervous arcs. Arthur raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a desk centered in the foyer. On its surface, a blue orb of light pulsed with a rhythmic, mechanical hum. It was not a static glow. It breathed, expanding and contracting in sync with the house itself. Milo leaped onto the mahogany desk, nose twitching toward the light. Arthur lunged, fingers outstretched to pull the kitten back, but his skin brushed the surface of the orb. A deafening metallic shriek erupted, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the window frames. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its hands spinning backward at impossible speeds. A shadow detached itself from the bookshelf, stretching into a jagged, unnatural silhouette. Milo hissed, arching his back as frost bloomed across the walls, turning the air into a freezing mist. Arthur realized the house was not a residence, but a massive, shifting engine, and it had just woken up. The walls groaned as the foyer floor tilted, revealing a hidden staircase descending into the dark. Arthur scooped Milo into his jacket, zipping it tight to shield the kitten from the biting cold. He descended, his boots hitting stone steps that felt more like metal plates. In the basement, the darkness vanished. The walls glowed with shifting, neon blue mathematical equations, scrolling across the masonry like code on a screen. Arthur navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his breath visible in the frigid air as the floor beneath him vibrated with the hum of a massive power source. He spotted a floorboard that sat unevenly against the frame. He pried it up with the edge of his flashlight, his pulse quickening, as he unearthed a heavy cache of leather-bound journals. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. They were not records of a house, but logs of coordinates and star maps. The blue orb upstairs was a beacon, a signal transmitted from a galaxy millions of light years away. This was no ghost story. It was a cosmic conspiracy. The moment Arthur tucked the final journal into his bag, the basement air pressure spiked. A massive iron door slammed shut at the top of the stairs, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. The neon blue equations on the walls flickered and died, replaced by a deep, pulsing crimson light. From the corners of the room, the shadows began to detach themselves from the stone, twisting into jagged, metallic shapes. They elongated, forming serrated, razor-sharp claws that scraped rhythmically against the floorboards. The house was no longer just shifting, it was purging. Arthur spun around, his flashlight beam catching the glint of steel limbs emerging from the gloom. The security system had identified an intruder, and it was closing the perimeter. A heavy, mechanical thud vibrated through the floor. Arthur backed away, his boots skidding on the cold stone as he searched for an exit. The walls groaned, the architecture itself compressing. Arthur spotted the narrow ventilation shaft near the ceiling, a steel grate hanging by a single screw. He scrambled up a stack of crates, his fingers clawing at the metal. He ripped the grate away and shoved his bag inside before crawling into the dark, cramped tunnel. Behind him, the heavy, rhythmic stomping reached the basement floor. The metallic guardians were inches away. Arthur pushed forward, his elbows scraping against the sharp edges of the duct. The metal walls began to groan, bending inward under immense, unseen pressure. The shaft was collapsing. Milo whimpered, his claws digging into Arthur's chest. Arthur ignored the pain, lunging toward the faint square of moonlight at the end of the tunnel. He reached the vent's end, braced his boots against the cover, and kicked with every ounce of remaining strength. The metal plate flew off into the night air. Arthur tumbled out, landing hard on the damp grass of the lawn. He rolled, gasping for air, and scrambled to his feet. He looked back at the house just as the last of the neon blue light vanished from the windows. The building plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the desk lamp. Arthur spread the leather-bound journals across the surface, the pages stiff and smelling of ozone. He smoothed out the star maps, his eyes tracing the jagged lines of coordinates. Milo curled into a tight ball on his lap, his rhythmic purring the only sound in the room. Arthur gripped his pen, his knuckles white. He cross-referenced the data with his own notes, and the truth solidified on the page. The blue orb was not a relic, it was a beacon. He tapped the map, the ink marking a location that was still transmitting. The house in the woods had been a gateway, and the signal was still active. Arthur looked toward the dark window, the silence of the night now feeling heavy and deliberate. The investigation had not ended in the basement. It had only just begun. Rain lashed against the office glass, blurring the city into a grey smear. Arthur leaned over the desk, eyes scanning the case files, until a sudden movement caught his attention. Milo, perched atop the stack, pinned a single page down with a firm, insistent paw. Arthur shifted his focus. Beneath a hand-drawn silver circle, microscopic numbers shimmered against the paper. He traced the digits, realizing they formed a set of coordinates pointing deep into the woods bordering Blackwood House. He grabbed his satchel, shoved the leather-bound books inside, and secured Milo into his carrier. The car engine roared to life, tires crunching over gravel as he sped toward the mist-covered forest. By the time the tree line emerged, the sun hung like a pale, sickly disk behind the clouds. The car skidded to a halt. Before him stood the tower, a jagged silhouette rising between skeletal, dead trees. Arthur moved toward the threshold of the silent structure. The air inside the tower tasted of pulverized stone and ozone. Arthur stepped over the threshold, his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor until it caught the edge of a spiral staircase plunging into the earth. He descended, each boot strike echoing like a hammer against the damp walls. At the base, he entered a circular chamber filled with dormant, silent machinery. In the center, a blue orb of light pulsed with rhythmic intensity. Arthur approached, his breath hitching as the light illuminated tall, ornate mirrors coated in a thick layer of frost. He flipped open the secret book, his fingers tracing the symbols on the parchment before matching them to the carvings etched into the floor. As his thumb pressed the final mark, the mirrors ignited with a blinding, frigid glow. A face materialized in the glass. It was Professor Eleanor Graves. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Arthur with an intensity that defied the silence. She spoke of a gateway between worlds, a breach she had accidentally unlocked. The professor's voice faded, replaced by a low, grinding vibration that rattled the floor beneath Arthur's boots. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, coating the machinery in a fine grey powder. He spun toward the tunnel entrance, his flashlight beam shaking. The rhythmic thud of heavy metallic feet began to echo from the darkness, growing louder with every pulse of the blue orb. Arthur retreated, his back hitting the cold glass of a mirror. He raised the flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal the first glint of steel claws. A phalanx of security machines marched into the chamber, their movements stiff and synchronized. They did not walk, they stalked. Behind them, a towering shadow emerged, its presence dwarfing the machines. It moved with a predatory grace, its eyes glowing like burning white stars. The air grew dense, pressurized, and impossibly cold. Arthur gripped his flashlight, his knuckles white, as the machines fanned out to seal the exits. The shadow stopped, its head tilting as if listening. Every escape route was blocked. He was trapped in the heart of the tower. Milo leaped from the carrier, landing squarely on the central control panel. His paws struck two heavy switches simultaneously. A shower of blue sparks erupted, freezing the machines mid-stride. The shadow roared, a sound like grinding metal, and lunged. Arthur snatched a heavy iron rod from the floor and swung it into the nearest mirror. The glass shattered, releasing a wave of light. The creature shrieked as cracks spiderwebbed across its dark form. "Break them all!" the professor's voice echoed in his mind. Arthur sprinted between the mirrors, swinging the rod with desperate force. Glass shards rained down, and Milo darted between the debris. At the final mirror, the creature's claws snagged Arthur's shoulder, tearing through the layers of his work. Milo launched himself at the creature's face. Arthur swung the rod with every ounce of his strength. The last mirror exploded into dust. A vacuum of wind roared through the room, dragging the creature backward into the blue light. The force pulled at Arthur, but he dug his heels into the stone. Then total silence. The heavy, stale air of the chamber had vanished. Arthur blinked, his vision clearing as morning light poured through the open tower door, washing away the remnants of the shadow. He sat up, the stone floor no longer vibrating with the hum of the engine. Standing before him was Professor Elena Graves. She was solid, real, and watching him with a steady, grateful smile. Milo sat at her feet, purring as she stroked his head. The machinery that had once pulsed with a cold blue light now lay dormant and broken, its threat dismantled. Arthur pushed himself to his feet, his muscles aching from the struggle. He stepped out of the tower and into the cool, clear air of the forest. The morning sun climbed above the horizon. He looked up at the vast, open sky. He knew the secrets of the stars were only beginning.